The wild Mustang, abandoned in the middle of a barren land, with no chance of survival. But this girl, daring to face the entire world, risking everything to bring him back when everyone thought it was madness. And then, the unimaginable happens. An unbelievable story of passionate love and extraordinary strength, when one woman, with unwavering determination, turns the impossible into reality. You'll be shocked, you won't believe your eyes. What you're about to hear will forever change the way you think about wild horses. Don't miss it, because this is the dramatic story you never saw coming. Montana, where vast fields stretch beneath a vast, unbroken blue sky, where fierce winds howl and towering mountains stand resolute through every season. These fields, these rugged peaks, and the powerful wind seem to embrace the wild world entirely, a world where Mustang horses, symbols of freedom and strength, roam free across endless plains. This is a portrait of nature, harsh, yet filled with an absolute beauty and freedom that nothing can control. It is a place where no compromise can be made, where life and death are separated by a single breath. In the midst of this untamed expanse lives a young woman named Sophia Mitchell, on a small farm. She is not just an animal caretaker but a bridge between the wilds of nature and humanity. Sophia has a deep love for nature and wildlife, especially Mustang horses, which represent absolute freedom. She spends most of her time caring for injured or abandoned animals, from orphaned baby birds to rare creatures left disabled by accidents. Sophia is a woman with a big heart and infinite patience. She doesn't just care for animals, she learns from them. The wild creatures she cares for teach her that love is not just about care and pampering, but sometimes about letting go, allowing them to reclaim the freedom and instincts they once had. For Sophia, her bond with nature is not just love, it is a profound understanding of life and death, of freedom and restraint. Her peaceful life, where each day begins with the wind whispering through the fields, is forever changed one fateful morning. As a storm rolls through, Sophia stops in the middle of the open field, where the eyes of a Mustang Foal beg for help. This is Shadow, a foal abandoned by its mother. Amid the fierce winds and relentless rain, Shadow stands alone, exhausted, unable to keep up with its herd, its eyes full of sorrow and desperation. The moment Sophia sees Shadow, her heart shatters. But before she can make a decision, a strange noise comes from the distance. Sophia turns to find a group of wild horse hunters suddenly appearing, heading straight toward the foal. In that instant, fear surges through her. She is not only faced with the task of saving Shadow, but with an impending threat closing in. As Shadow gazes at her with pleading eyes, Sophia knows that this decision will not only change the foal's life but will also alter her own. She scoops Shadow into her arms and races toward her small farm, but the threat from the wild horse hunters remains relentless. Sophia knows that wild animals are not just creatures in need of help. They also have wild instincts, desires, and an uncontrollable yearning for freedom. Saving Shadow will be her greatest challenge, a battle not only to protect the foal but also to preserve the freedom that it embodies. But can Sophia hold on to that freedom, or will she face inner conflicts that she had never anticipated? And so begins a journey unlike any other, as love and freedom begin their eternal struggle. The morning in Montana began like any other day, peaceful, serene, and full of promise. The vast fields stretched endlessly beneath the sky, the wind whispering through the grass, and the towering mountains loomed like silent giants in the distance. But shortly after, a gust of wind suddenly arrived, bringing with it dark, ominous clouds gathering in the sky. Everything grew quiet, as if nature itself was preparing for something greater. The storm was coming, accompanied by distant thunder, and flashes of lightning lit up the darkening sky. As Sophia walked through the grassy fields, her eyes caught a faint movement, small, fragile, and delicate. It was unlike anything she had seen before. As she approached, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the vast desolation, stood a foal, its body trembling, unable to keep up with the herd that had left it behind. It looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes, making weak, desperate sounds, abandoned and alone. Sophia stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. The foal, exhausted, could hardly stand, but still, it tried to follow its family. She felt its deep sense of abandonment, the fear of survival in this harsh land. She understood that feeling all too well, the feeling of being left behind in a world where nature's rules are harsh and unforgiving. Her chest tightened as she stepped forward, her instincts urging her to reach out to the foal. The look in its eyes, pleading, lost, pierced her heart. She couldn't turn away. The silent cry of the foal echoed in her heart, urging her to act. Slowly, she knelt down and extended her hand. She didn't fully understand why, but something inside her compelled her to approach this fragile creature. Perhaps it was a deep sense of empathy. Perhaps it was because she understood all too well the feeling of needing someone. But whatever the reason, the decision had been made. The foal hesitated at first, uncertain, yet yearning for comfort, before it took a cautious step toward her. It came close enough to feel the warmth of her hand, the reassurance in her presence. In that brief moment, there were no words, but powerful emotions passed between them. Fragile, fleeting, yet undeniable. Before she could decide what to do next, a sudden sound shattered the silence, the pounding of hooves. At first faint, but gradually growing clearer, the unmistakable sound of wild horses moving toward her. The tension in the air rose, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Sophia's heart raced in her chest. There was no time to waste. She stood on the threshold of something much larger than this moment, a decision that would change everything. As the storm continued to rage, Sophia's gaze fell upon the small, fragile figure of the foal, abandoned in the middle of the desolate field. Her heart tightened, she couldn't leave it there. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, gazing at the foal. The storm howled around her, but in that fleeting moment, all she could hear was the foal's faint, desperate whimpers. It was a sound that struck deep into her soul. The helplessness in the foal's eyes mirrored a part of herself she knew all too well, a part that longed for compassion and safety. She took a step forward, her heart racing as the wind picked up, making the moment feel as though time was stretching into eternity. The cold bite of the air seemed to sharpen her senses, but it couldn't numb the overwhelming urge to help. "I can't just leave you," she whispered to herself. "I have to do something." The foal's eyes met hers, filled with confusion and fear, but also a glimmer of hope. It was as if it knew, deep down, that Sophia was the lifeline it so desperately needed. Slowly, she knelt beside it, careful not to startle the creature. The foal took a hesitant step toward her, as if testing the waters, unsure but craving the warmth and comfort she offered. Sophia's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the foal. It was a moment of pure connection, silent but powerful. She felt the frailty of the foal's body, its ribs pressing against her as she gently placed her arms around it. She could feel the deep tremor in its limbs, the exhaustion that weighed it down, and in that moment, her resolve was solidified. "I won't let you face this alone," she whispered softly, holding the foal tightly against her chest. Despite the weight of the decision she was making, knowing the danger of intervening in nature's course, Sophia couldn't turn away. The instinct to help, to offer sanctuary, was too strong to ignore. The wildness of the foal, its survival instinct, reminded her of something deeper. Something wild and untamed inside herself that called her to protect this creature. As she cradled the foal in her arms, she made her way back through the storm. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. She knew the foal was not just any animal, Shadow was a Mustang, a symbol of freedom and wildness, and by bringing it into her care, she was about to face a world of complications she couldn't yet understand. But one thing was clear, she couldn't leave it behind. She couldn't walk away from a creature in need, no matter how dangerous or difficult it would be to care for it. As they reached the shelter of her small farm, Sophia glanced down at the foal, its eyes now calm yet filled with trust. "You'll be safe here," she murmured. "I'll take care of you. But we'll need to face what's coming together." And in that moment, she knew this was only the beginning, of a bond that would be tested by love, by nature, and by the wild spirit of freedom that coursed through both of them. As Sophia stepped outside, Shadow's desperate gaze locked onto her, not just searching for food, but yearning for comfort. She knew that once she got closer, an inevitable, challenging journey would begin, for both Shadow and herself. In the beginning, Sophia gently carried Shadow inside, placing the small foal in a warm corner where she had set up a thick blanket and prepared plenty of food. She understood that Shadow's recovery wouldn't be quick. The weak tremors of the foal only deepened the weight in her heart. She spent every moment, every hour, caring for him, feeding him, watching him sleep peacefully. Every time she saw him breathe softly in slumber, her heart swelled with affection. But over time, something more developed. The bond between them grew stronger, more undeniable. Shadow wasn't just a wild creature clinging to life anymore. He had become a true companion, a member of her family. Each time Sophia approached, the foal didn't just look up in search of food, it looked at her with wide eyes, expecting comfort and care only she could provide. There were moments, quiet and fleeting, when Sophia sat beside him, and it felt as if time itself paused. Gone were the fears, the desperation. They were just two souls, finding solace in each other's presence. Every time Shadow nuzzled his nose against her hand, an invisible bond passed between them, a silent thank you, unspoken yet profoundly understood. In those days of caring for Shadow, Sophia realized something: she wasn't just healing him. She was healing herself too. She came to understand that love isn't just about giving someone what they need, it's about finding peace in giving, in helping another being rediscover life. And in Shadow's eyes, Sophia saw acceptance, gratitude, and a serenity she had never known before. As the days passed, a new rhythm began to form between Sophia and Shadow. The foal no longer sought food alone but also sought comfort in her presence. What began as a simple act of rescue had now evolved into a deep bond, transcending the boundaries between a woman and a wild horse. Shadow's behavior slowly began to change. Though born a wild Mustang, he started acting more like a domesticated animal, something Sophia never thought possible. He followed her everywhere, always seeking her presence, and finding comfort in her vicinity. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. The once wary foal had transformed into a constant companion. On cold nights, Shadow would curl up beside her, content and trusting, resting his head on her lap. His warm body absorbed every ounce of the love and safety she offered. As she gently stroked his dark coat, Sophia often found herself reflecting on how far they had come. This wild creature, once abandoned, now found peace in her home. At times, Shadow would stand by the window, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. He wasn't seeking escape, but it seemed as though he was processing his past, the wilderness still calling to him. Yet, every time, his gaze would shift back to Sophia. Without fail, he would return to her side. It was as if he had found his place in this world, a place he never knew he needed until now. In those quiet moments, Sophia realized that they shared something extraordinary, a connection forged through vulnerability, trust, and love. They were no longer just a woman and a wild horse, they had become friends, companions, bound by something far more powerful than either could have anticipated. The connection between Sophia and Shadow deepened. What had started as a rescue mission had evolved into something more profound, an unspoken bond that neither of them could deny. Sophia had known from the start that keeping Shadow would bring challenges, but nothing had prepared her for the opposition that followed. Her family, especially her brother Mark, warned her. "Sophia, you can't keep him. He's a Mustang. He belongs out there, with his herd. You're putting yourself in danger." Their concern was evident, but to Sophia, it felt like a misunderstanding. Shadow wasn't just any wild animal, he was her companion. And then, the wildlife authorities arrived. "You can't keep him," they said, their voices firm. "He's a wild animal. He belongs in the wild." The weight of their judgment felt like a heavy burden on her shoulders. If they took him away, she would lose everything. Sophia stood at the crossroads, torn between love and responsibility. Shadow had become more than just a foal she rescued, he had become a part of her life. But she knew, deep down, that he was meant for the wild. Could she let go of the connection they had formed? Could she send him back to a life she had tried to protect him from? The winds howled, carrying with them the distant call of the plains, a reminder of the freedom Shadow was born to embrace. But could she let go of the one thing that made her feel whole? The choice weighed heavily on her heart as the storm outside mirrored the one inside. Shadow's growth became undeniable. His once frail body was now strong and powerful, yet there was a restlessness in his eyes, one that Sophia could no longer ignore. The freedom he was born for was slowly taking hold of him, and she could feel the inevitable shift within him. Shadow's body had grown into the powerful Mustang he was always meant to be. No longer the fragile foal she had first saved, he now stood tall and proud, his muscles strong and his gaze unwavering. His coat, once thin and dull, now gleamed with the health and vigor of a wild creature. But as he grew stronger, something else stirred inside him, the deep, inescapable pull of the wild. Sophia watched as he moved across the open field, his movements sure and confident, but there was something more in his eyes, an untamable desire to roam freely. Despite all the love and care she had given him, she couldn't deny the truth, he was not meant to be confined. His spirit, wild and free, was growing more restless by the day. In those quiet moments, when she would see him staring into the distance, eyes locked onto the horizon, she felt the weight of the truth heavy on her heart. Shadow was no longer the helpless creature she had rescued, he was a Mustang, born to roam the open plains, wild and free. And she, despite her love for him, could not cage his spirit. The real heartache for Sophia was the realization that, in saving him, she had also unintentionally made him dependent on her. The same bond that had formed between them was now the very thing that held him back from fulfilling his true purpose. The wild called to him, and she could feel it every time he turned his gaze toward the hills beyond their farm. Sophia's love for Shadow was deep and unwavering, but in this moment, she understood that true love meant letting go. She had protected him, cared for him, and given him a safe space, but now, she had to let him return to his roots, to the wild, where he belonged. The freedom he yearned for could not be given within the confines of her home. Watching him one last time, standing there, tall and proud, Sophia felt a deep sense of loss, but also a quiet understanding. She had to let go, not because she didn't love him, but because loving him meant giving him the freedom to be who he was meant to be. Shadow wasn't just a symbol of wildness, he was the embodiment of the freedom they both longed for. And in that moment, Sophia knew, she had done what she could, but now it was time to let him go. Sophia watched Shadow grow stronger, but a quiet restlessness began to settle in his eyes. She saw it, the wildness calling to him, pulling him back toward the freedom he was born for. The bond between them was undeniable, but a painful truth was dawning on Sophia: love meant letting go. Sophia's heart ached as she sat by the window, watching Shadow wander around the yard, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. He had grown into a majestic young stallion, a far cry from the fragile foal she had taken in months ago. But with his growth came a change, a restlessness that Sophia couldn't ignore. It was as though a part of him, buried deep within his wild spirit, was calling out to the open fields. It was as if the land itself whispered his name, pulling him toward a freedom that Sophia could no longer provide within the safety of her farm. The bond they shared was undeniable, and her love for him had blossomed in ways she had never imagined. But now, as she observed him, she knew deep down that he was not hers to keep. The love they shared wasn't meant to be bound by fences or walls. It was the kind of love that set him free. The truth of it all began to gnaw at her, a truth she had tried to deny for as long as she could. Sophia had always been driven by a desire to protect. Growing up, she had often felt the sting of abandonment. Her own parents had given her up when she was too young to understand why, leaving her to fend for herself in a world that seemed too vast and uncaring. She had learned to survive on her own, but the pain of being left behind never truly healed. It shaped her, built the walls around her heart, and fueled her desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But now, as she stood in the quiet of her home, watching Shadow stand at the fence, eyes fixed on the horizon, she realized the depth of her own fear. Was it love that kept him with her? Or was it the fear of losing him? The fear of being abandoned once more? Sophia knew that Shadow's heart wasn't bound to her, it was bound to the land, to the wild spirit of the Mustang. She had given him everything she could, her love, her care, her protection, but she also knew that, in the end, she could not cage his spirit. His soul was meant to roam freely, just as his ancestors had. But the thought of letting him go, of watching him leave her, was more than she could bear. The thought of him running back into the wild, never looking back, was like a knife in her chest. Could she bear to lose him? Could she let him go to fulfill his destiny, even if it meant facing the unbearable truth that she might never see him again? The question tormented her. In her heart, she knew that it was the right thing to do, but the pain of it was overwhelming. Was this what true love meant? Was love truly about letting go, about freeing someone you cherished more than yourself? She closed her eyes, her mind racing. She thought back to the night she had first found him, the fragile foal, abandoned and desperate for help. She had promised him safety, warmth, and care. But now, the promise seemed to have changed. She had promised him love, yes, but now she was faced with a much harder truth. Love meant freedom. Love meant letting him return to the wild, where he belonged. Sophia stood up slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that had been growing inside her. She walked out into the yard, where Shadow was standing by the fence, as if waiting for her. His dark eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, she knew, he knew. They both knew that the time had come. She approached him slowly, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his coat. The warmth of his body sent a jolt through her, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as though she could hold on forever. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew it wasn't meant to be. He was not hers to keep. Taking a deep breath, she opened the gate. Shadow hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on her, as if unsure whether to stay or go. But then, without a second glance, he stepped through the gate and into the wild, into the freedom that was always his. Sophia stood there for a long time, watching him disappear into the vast expanse of Montana's wilderness. Her heart was breaking, but there was also a sense of peace, of finality, that she had never felt before. She had let him go, and in doing so, she had found a kind of peace she had never known. She whispered to the wind, "Go free, my friend. Go where you belong." And as the last glimpse of Shadow faded into the horizon, she knew that the love they shared would remain, eternal and free, in both of their hearts. Sophia stood silently, the wind whispering around her as Shadow turned toward the wild. The time had come to let go, to give him the freedom he needed. As the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land, Sophia stood at the edge of the field, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The bond she had forged with Shadow was unbreakable, but it was time to face the truth that love sometimes means letting go. She had given him everything she could, but the time had come for him to return to the wild, where he truly belonged. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and Sophia felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. What she had once feared, losing him, was now inevitable, and in her heart, she knew it was the right thing to do. The decision to let Shadow go was not made lightly. As Sophia stood in the fading light, watching the last traces of his silhouette against the vast, wild expanse, her heart was heavy with grief, but also with an undeniable sense of peace. The love she had for him was something deeper than just affection. It wasn't about keeping him by her side, sheltered and safe. It was about giving him the freedom to live the life he was meant to lead. Sophia had spent so many nights wondering if her care for Shadow was enough to make him happy. She had done everything she could to nurture him, to protect him from the harshness of the world. But now, as she watched him stand tall, his body strong and his spirit wild once again, she realized that the greatest act of love she could give him was the one that freed him. The wild called to him, and he had to answer. In her heart, she understood that she was not losing him. No, she was releasing him, setting him free to embrace his true nature, to run with the wind, and to live in the way that was always destined for him. Shadow had never belonged to her, not in the way that people often claim ownership of what they love. He belonged to the wilderness, to the open plains where he could run with the herd, free from the constraints of human care. Sophia stood silently as Shadow took his first step toward freedom, the grass brushing against his hooves as he made his way into the wild. She felt a pang of sadness, yes, but also a profound sense of gratitude for having been a part of his journey. Their time together had been short, but it was full of meaning, and the love they shared would remain with her forever. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophia turned away, knowing that the bond between them had not been broken. Shadow would always be a part of her, and she would always be a part of him. Their love was not defined by proximity, but by understanding, by sacrifice, and by the respect for the freedom he needed. The wild had called him back, and Sophia had answered with an open heart. She had set him free, And in doing so, she had found freedom for herself, too. The lesson was clear: love is not about keeping someone close, it is about letting them be who they are meant to be. When Sophia allowed Shadow to return to the wild, she realized that true love isn't about holding on, but about letting go. In that painful yet profound decision, she learned that the strongest bonds are not built through possession, but through understanding, respect, and the freedom to be oneself. And even though they said goodbye, the question lingered: is true love always about separation, or sometimes, is it simply a shared moment, allowing both to find freedom and meaning in their own worlds?